Here's a great explanation of the current inflation situation from Chris Maloney at Bank of Oklahoma Securities. More money, more problems. When national debts have once been accumulated to a certain degree, there is scarce, I believe, a single instance of their having been fairly and completely paid. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. Inflation, properly defined in its correct economic term, is an increase in the money supply. What we refer to as inflation, higher prices, is in fact the effect of inflation. It is not inflation itself. Yet, I am not about to fight the winds of change. Language evolves and changes all the time, so I will use inflation in its modern, albeit incorrect, usage. Inflation is on Wall Street's mind of late, not so much because of the higher price of goods and services, but because it will largely determine the Fed's monetary policy stance going forward. As one who adheres to what history has proven time and again, that inflation is a monetary phenomenon. It is always disconcerting to hear Federal Reserve officials blame inflation on everything but the dramatic increase in the money supply during QE4. Between February 2020 and April 2022, the money supply grew by 44%, an 18.4% annualized increase. That's almost 3 times the average annual increase in the money supply seen during the preceding half century. The old rate of increase helped deliver a 3.9% average annualized CPI rate. Since QE4 kicked off, the rate of increase in CPI has risen to 5.6% annualized. More money, more problems. The money supply has actually dropped 5.4% since hitting its record high of $22 trillion back in April of 2022. A decline in the money supply hasn't occurred since the Great Depression, and this is not the way one wishes to bring about an end to any inflationary episode. As with a lower money supply, it will become impossible for people to pay back their debts, as there will be nothing available to pay it back with. The best course is to try, as best as humanly possible, to keep the money supply steady and allow productivity to grow the economy up to the newly increased level of the money supply. This is how the Treasury got the nation back onto gold post-Civil War. In the latest report, the money supply grew at an annualized pace of 0.6%. Over the past decade, productivity growth has averaged 1.6% annualized. It would be best to keep money supply growth below that level until the 2% inflation target is attained. This will be difficult, if not impossible to do, with a Congress that shows no inclination at all to bring federal deficit spending under control. Deficit spending is highly inflationary. Naturally, to expect them to do so during an election year is wishful thinking, but the ever-growing pile of U.S. Treasury debt is finally, after decades of reckless fiscal behavior, starting to be noticed by investors. The rate of increase to that pile for this decade to date has averaged 10% each year. 2020 alone saw it rise 19.4% from $23.2 trillion to $27.70 trillion. Overall, since year-end 2019, outstanding Treasury debt has increased 46.6% from $23.2 trillion to $34 trillion. Even as the economy has grown the federal deficits as a percentage of total GDP, and remember that government spending is counted in that GDP calculation, is far above its trailing 30-year average of 3.7%. In fact, it has not been below that 3.7% average since June of 2018. All of history warns that once a group of politicians have buried their nation under a debt load so large as to be unpayable, inflation is their default choice. So the Federal Reserve is fighting inflation on one hand, while the politicians who control it are pumping out inflation on the other. Christopher Maloney, Vice President Mortgage Strategist, BOK Financial, C. Maloney at bokf.com.